Hey guys, welcome to week 7. This week we're going to go over some Sbrt planning, specifically lung. Should be a pretty quick video. I think Sbrt planning is actually pretty easy, easier than traditional planning most of the time, so hopefully you guys agree with me. Let's add our plan quick. So for Sbrt, obviously we're treating a high dose per fraction for just a few, up to 5 fractions. So for this case, we're going to do 1,000 centigrade times 5 fractions. And because we're treating such a high dose, you want a high dose rate. And with flattening filter-free energies, so it looks like we have 2 on this true beam here, we're going to use 6. With flattening filter-free energies, you have higher dose rates. So our standard dose rate for 6x is 600 mu per minute. If we use 6x FFF, it goes up to 1400 mu per minute. So the delivery will be a lot faster. So that's why we're picking that. We're going to use 6 because traditionally most people still use 6x for lung plans. Lower energy for lung plans, just because at least in the early days of treatment planning, the planning systems struggled sometimes calculating accurately if you used high energy beams in plans that were treating the lung or had a lot of lung tissue in the field. So people still pretty much use 6x, but modern algorithms, modern treatment planning systems handle it pretty well. So arguably you could maybe use 10x, but like I said, most places still use 6 for lung. That looks good. Oh, well, I'll show you in a bit. Let me do my arc geometry tool, make sure I have my PTV selected. I'm going to do 1 ISO 2 half rotations. For this case, 30 degrees is going to be fine. Because our monitor units are going to be so high, there is one more thing we have to do. So we're going to go to the geometry tab of our beam and change the technique from arc to SRS arc. So there's different MU limits for these different techniques. And I guess I don't know what GVSU's limits are in here, but most clinics put like an MU limit of, I don't know, 1500 or 1000 or something like that on arc. And they have a higher limit on SRS arc. So most time for Sbrt cases, you want to change that to SRS arc. Doesn't actually affect your planning process at all. It's just something that happens behind the scenes in Eclipse. So both these fields are SRS arc. Now, something that I do for every Sbrt plan is I add couch kicks. It creates a better plan. You can meet your dose constraints without them, I think almost every time, but you can meet them better if you add couch kicks. I'm not going to do it in this video, and I'm not going to make you guys do it, but if you want to play around with it, you can compare your plan with no couch kicks to a plan run with the same objectives with these couch kicks that I'm going to show you. And take a look. Your objectives probably will look the same, but if you look at low isodose lines, like your 20% line or your 10% line, you can almost cut the volume of that dose cloud in half sometimes with your couch kicks. So it's just, your plan's gonna be better. If you're shooting for a LARA, couch kicks are gonna help you out. And I typically do 10 degrees each way. If it's in the upper lung like this and we can't see the arms, and I think I might have collision issues with the arms, I might just back the one, so not that one. So the angle that's rotating up towards the arm there, I might do, darn it, 353. Maybe 7 degrees or something like that. 10 degrees works, I'd say 90% of the time. But occasionally when I do these plans, I do have some arm issues. So just to be safe, if I'm kind of in the upper half of that lung, I'm going to only do 7 degrees towards that lung. Put our prescription in, 1,000 times 5. And we are ready to go. So this PTV is pretty large. Let's see. "56 cc's, that's pretty big. If we're in the like 5 cc's or lower area, so really small PTV, I'm gonna make sure if I come into volume dose, I'm gonna put my calculation grid to something like 0.1, you know, something smaller because my PTV is so small. In this case, I'm gonna leave it at 0.25 to make it calculate faster. And the PTV is big enough to make that okay. But if we're dealing with a really small structure, you want to make sure you change that dose grid size to usually, I use 0.1. Okay. Oh yeah, the structures I use. So I'm going to have you guys create 3 structures. I already created them. The first structure is called D2CM. And we call it D2CM because we use it to see what the dose 2 cm away from my PTV is. So Sbrt plans have very specific metrics and dose constraints that you need to meet, which we'll talk about after I run this plan quick. But one of them is we want to track the dose that is 2 cm away from my PTV. So this is just the body minus my PTV with a 2 cm margin. Okay. The next one is this ring 50. It's just my standard 50 ring that we did for our prostate plans. It's 2 cm away, just like the D2CM, and then 2 cm thick. But I'm going to use this ring to control that dose 2 cm away. But the problem with using this is this volume is huge. This is a really big volume. So the sensitivity inside our optimizer will not be great. So I don't like using volumes this big in the optimizer. I'm essentially made this smaller version so that I can push on it while I'm optimizing. And last but not least, just the PTV minus your GTV. So it'll give you this, you know, ring kind of inside your PTV that we'll use. There we go. Okay, so because this is Sbrt, the rules are a little different, so my starting point is going to be slightly different. This is how I start almost every Sbrt plan though. So I'm going to add an upper and a lower on my PTV. Lower is the same as usual, but this time I'm going to put priority of 75. My upper is going to be just a lot higher than usual. So most Sbrt objectives protocols are based on so lung, for example, is based on RTOG 0813. Lots of people still follow that protocol. All the newer protocols are kind of still based on that original 0813. So 0813 allowed a hotspot inside your PTV of 166%. So Sbrt plans can get really hot, which is okay. So standard lung is 1,000 times 5. I allow those to get up to 7,000. And that's just because that's what the Sbrt physicians at my clinic like, but some will let that go up to, you know, like I just said, 166%, or most will have kind of their own rules. I suggest for you guys, it's always a good bet to start here, and you know, you can adjust according to how your physicians like to plan these. But for this practice plan, put 7,000 in here. I'm going to add an upper and a lower to this PTV minus GTV. So the lower is going to be the exact same, but the upper I'm going to put at 6,000. And then I'm going to add a lower on my GTV of whatever I put right here. So what we're trying to do here is just control the fall off or control the dose gradient inside of our PTV. So I have this PTV minus GTV kind of ring on the outer edge of my PTV, right? So I'm saying I want the outer edge to be 5,000, but I want it to only allow up to 6,000 on this inner edge. So I want it to fall off from 5,000 to 6,000, and I'm telling the GTV to have a minimum of 6,000. So then everything inside this GTV is 6,000. And then we're going to push on that ring and our NTO pretty hard. So hopefully our max dose ends up right in the center, right around 7,000. But I'm just trying to control that and make sure it doesn't get lopsided or anything like that. I just want it to be nice and smooth all the way around. D2CM, I'm going to put an upper of 1900 at 50. I'm going to change my NTO to 150. So again, the point of SBRT is we're putting a very high dose to a very small targeted area. This is pretty large for lung SBRT, this PTV. But we're trying to basically, anything in that PTV, I mean, we're just trying to give it an ablative dose. We're just trying to kill it, right? So we don't care if it's a hot spot inside of that GTV or even that PTV usually. It all needs to die, basically. It's all tumor. So this is how I start almost every single time. So we'll get started. If it was a different treatment site or a different, prescription, I use kind of these same, if you change these numbers to relative numbers, I gotta fix something, I would use the same thing. So if we were only going to 3,000, I would do whatever 1,900 divided by 5,000 times 3,000, if that makes sense. I use the same relative relationship between all these. My targets are all 75, my ring is 50, NTO is 150. That's how I start every single SBRT plan. I don't think in this case we'll have to add any OARs, but if I did, I do it the same way that I plan any other plan. I wait till that step 3 in level 1 to add my OARs and go on. Let's see what our problem is here. Beam data. Maybe we can't use 6FFF. Nope, not that one either. Shoot, okay. Well, it's okay. I mean, ideally, for SBRT, you want to use flattening filter free beam. It just makes sense. You take that you want a hot spot in the middle essentially, or you don't care if there's a hot spot. So we don't need a flat beam profile. We can take that flattening filter out. It's just unnecessary. and without it, your dose rate can be a lot higher. So you definitely, in the clinic, if you have FFF, you want to use it. For this case, I guess we need to use just standard 6x. Why can't I turn intermediate dose on? Oh. Okay. Maybe. There we go. Okay, like any plan, I'm just going to kind of watch it until we get to that step 3. My coverage should be really good, in this step 1. If it doesn't look good, that means something's wrong with my beams. Because I changed my beams to SRS arc, this setting down here turned to fine. So the optimization resolution is 1.25 millimeters. Probably, again, not necessary because our PTV is pretty big. Again, if it gets down to that like 5 cc or smaller area, maybe up to 10 cc or smaller area, then I would use this fine right here. Anytime I change my dose grid for my final dose calculation, where I showed you, if I were to change that to 0.1 or something like that, I definitely want to use fine, but we did not. So definitely no reason to have this at fine, I don't think, in this plan. It'll just make it take forever to run. You can see it's taken forever right here. But everything's looking good. I mean, so far our dose is kind of shaping out how we want. You can see we have excellent coverage. Our GTV is up there. If you see our PTV minus GTV max dose is somewhere around, well, we can look here. It's 63.41, but our PTV max dose is 69. That means our hotspot is inside of our GTV, right? It has to be, which is good, which is what we want. If you look over here, everything is pretty close to the same. There's no one objective that's really overpowering all the others, which again is what you want. If this, oh, you know what? I used the wrong one. There we go. So you can see the difference there. That D2CM, that line is really low at 1900, so it thinks it's doing a great job, whereas this ring 50, you can see a big percentage of that was not meeting this constraint, so it immediately spikes. Even though these two structures kind of overlap and I put the same objective there, that's a good example of the size of this OAR definitely affects what you're going to have to do here. And that's why I don't like to use this D2cm, the whole thing, the body minus PTV plus 2cm. You can see the volume right here. It's just massive. So again, the sensitivity just isn't quite the same as using this ring. So we should get a much sharper, faster dose fall off outside of our PTV, at least up to 50% by using this structure instead of this one. Does it matter that I put 2 in there? No. I mean, I could delete this one, but I don't have to. Let's see if we can get it to step 3 here sooner rather than later. We'll look at some OARs. Then I will fast forward through the rest of this. But you can see, so our NTO is really high compared to all these priorities, so it should do a really good job keeping, you know, our 100 line and every line very conformal. And then we're specifically going to focus on the dose 2cm away with this ring because that is one of the objectives. The most strict object. So we'll go over this again once this plan finishes up, but the objectives, our conformity objectives and the dose 2cm away depends on the size of this PTV. But the most strict objective is you want your 50% line to be inside 2cm. So that's what I'm trying to always do. So our 50% line would be 2500. I want the max dose to this ring to definitely be less than 2500. The bigger the PTV, the harder that is. So that's why it's not right now. We'll see if we can get it there. If not, we're probably okay because, like I said, the bigger the PTV, the higher that limit is. So it's probably more than 50 cm or 50 gray for 50% for the size of this PTV. Okay, we're in step 3. I'm just going to one by one. So cord plus 5 is at about 10 gray. That's pretty low. Esophagus, let me double check. So yeah, that's very low. Great vessels can go up to 47 gray, I believe. No problem. Lung, usually not a whole lot you can do with your lung. I mean, we're using our NTO and our ring to push dose as hard as we can. So I usually don't add anything on my lung. You can try to push on your V20 like you normally would for a lung, but it probably isn't gonna really budge a whole lot just because we already are getting the dose as tight as we can. So yeah, everything is pretty low. I don't think you guys are gonna have to add any objectives as long as you add these ones and your plan shapes out properly. That's about all you'll have to do. And then I'll have you guys check to make sure you meet all your objectives with this spreadsheet, but otherwise should be a simple week. Let me play this through and we'll go over that when it finishes. Real quick, something else I wanted to talk about, I guess, is I use EUDs on things like rings too. You don't have to only use them on OARs. So if I want to really crank on this ring, I will add an upper EUD to my ring and then treat it pretty much like any other EUD I would add on an OAR. I just slowly kind of try to push this down, and it's great because it'll focus on the dose to the whole width of that ring and just slowly try to drive that dose out, which will in turn, you know, give you a sharper fall off. So again, this plan is super easy. The location of this PTV makes this plan really easy. Obviously, the closer the the target is to any of your sensitive OERs, the more difficult it's going to be. I still start my plan like this, but then in step 3, you got to start pushing on your dose to those OERs like you would any other plan. But that's it. I mean, it's important to remember it is just like any other plan. Even though it can seem scary at first, like, oh my gosh, I'm delivering 1,000 centigrade per day. It's crazy. My hot spot is 150% or whatever you come up with. That's nuts. It's not. I mean, you just have a different set of objectives that you're going to be following. As long as you meet your objectives, just like you do any other plan, I mean, your plan is good. It's going to be safe. You're going to be fine. So no problem. And like I said, just a lot of times I feel like these plans are quicker and easier than my standard fractionation plans. All right, finally done. Let's normalize. So, you know, I think for you guys to normalize 100, cover 95 like usual is fine. Usually you can get away with a little bit better coverage though. A lot of times these I'm normalizing to, 98% coverage or something like that. Let's check our Dmax. It's always the first thing I do for these. Pretty close to the center. Ideally, you would want it perfectly in the center, right at your isocenter, but anywhere in the GTV is going to be okay. Our max dose is 145%, which is what we told it to do. So pretty much whatever you tell it to do. So we put 7,000 in there, 145%, but whatever you put in there, you should get. So it just depends on what your clinic likes to do. Okay, let's talk about dose constraints. So what I'm going to give you guys is, let me find it, this Excel sheet. So this is pretty old. I don't think in the clinic we've used this for about 4 years now, 5 years. Because we have ClearCheck now for Eclipse. I don't know if any of you are familiar with ClearCheck. If you're not, I suggest looking it up. It's by a company called Radformation. It's super cool. But anyways, we use that, but we used to fill out a sheet like this. So what you do is you fill it out with your plans information here. Max dose is 7260. PTV volume 56.24. So 2 ways to, well, I'll just show you the easiest way. There's 2 ways to get your 100% and your 50% isodose line volumes. One way, I'll show you both. One way is to convert those isodose lines into a structure. That's a super simple way. The other is if we just look at our body contour, change our DVH to absolute volume, you can come to 5,000 here, and the volume of 5,000 centigrade inside the body is 54.96. %, same thing, will come to 2,500 centigrade, 195.15. max dose 2 cm away. So we come look at our D2CM. 2487.1. The reason why you should still make this D2CM and not totally rely on this ring is because it's possible. So pretend the constraint we're looking at is 50%, right? Like I was saying, it's possible for my 50% line to be contained inside of this ring, but then break apart and have like a streak of 50% way out in the exterior. So that ring won't be getting a max dose above 50%, but the outer body is, and the actual protocol constraint is everywhere in the body. So you still want to use this big contour right here to get this value. And if we look here, so this table is from RTOG 0813, and a lot of current modern day protocols still use this exact same table. But you can see here, this column right here is looking at our conformity index of our 100% isodose line. So we want a conformity index less than 1.2 for every PTV size. Over here is the conformity index of our 50% isodose line. And you can see it changes depending on our PTV size. So it gets a lot more relaxed the bigger the PTV is. Then we have our max dose 2 cm away, and then our lung B20, but you can see lung B20 less than 10 for every single case. You can see here, so 50% is the strictest it gets, like I was saying, but for the bigger PTV volumes, it gets a little bit more relaxed because it's harder to get that dose to be that tight, the bigger the volume. Our PTV is 56, so what it's doing is it's interpolating between this 50 row and this 70 row. So our number that it's looking at is going to be somewhere between 62 and 66. And it's doing, the spreadsheet's doing the math for us, so we don't have to do the math. So if you look here, oh, and then don't forget this one. We need the V20 of our lung. Changes back to normal. 5.6%. Okay, so we type all that information in, and if you have a deviation or you're not meeting the constraints, this will, I think it turns red, I can't even remember, but green is good. So if it's green, you pass. So basically this number right here needs to be less than 1.2. It's only 0.98. That's why I said we normally can get better coverage than 95%. Usually I'll prescribe like 100 covering 98% of the volume or something like that, because our essentially what this means is the volume of our 100% line is smaller than the volume of our PTV, which is good if you think about it, because we only told our 100% line to cover 95% of our PTV. So we told 5% to be cold. So this makes sense. It means our plan is just extra good, since this is less than 1. Our 50 is 3.47. We needed it to be below 3.84, so that's good. D2CM is 49.7. We needed it to be below 63.2, so that's very good. D20 is below 10, so that's good. Volume of 105% outside PTV. So I'm not going to make you guys look at that. It has to be less than 15% to meet RTOG 0813. It's almost impossible to mess this up and still meet all these other constraints. So don't worry about this one right here. If you come to this OARs tab over here, you have a lot of constraints. So a lot of people follow Timmerman constraints for Sbrt plans. He's kind of the Sbrt god, if you will. But these are his older version. He has newer. I think his newest version is from 2016, maybe 17. But a lot of them are the same. These are fine for now. I kind of highlighted the ones you need to focus on for this particular plan. You just need to make sure you meet these constraints. You should pass with flying colors. I won't go over them in detail. Rib, usually you do not sacrifice plan quality or coverage to meet rib constraints. But I feel like you probably will meet them for this plan anyway. So make sure you're meeting these constraints. If you for some reason cannot meet one of these constraints, shoot me an email. But like I said, should be no problem. Let's talk about this lung right here. So this lung constraint is a little different than what you're normally used to seeing. So these are critical volume constraints. So what does that mean? So we're saying, if you look at this, we're saying we need to spare at least 1500 cc's from 12.5 gray. Okay, so it's a little different. Let me find my picture here. This is what a critical volume constraint looks like. This is what you need to do. So instead of looking at your DVH and going to like the 1500 cc area like you would a normal constraint, we need to do kind of the opposite. So you look for the dose. So like in this picture, we want to find 12.5 gray on our DVH, and then the volume above that. So the volume of lung getting less than 12.5, this is the volume that needs to be above 1500 cc's. So in this case, the max lung volume is 3600 cc's up here. So we would take 3600 minus, what does it say, 1200 cc's, which is where 12.5 falls. So 12.5 gray, it happens to fall right at 1200 cc's. So we take 3600 minus 12, which gives us 2400 cc's. That is higher than 1500 cc's. So we meet that constraint, we pass. And you do the same thing at 13.5. So you need to find the volume that's getting less than this critical volume dose. It needs to be more than this number in order to pass your constraint. Lots of people, lots and lots and lots of people mess this up. Okay, so I want to make sure you guys understand that. Make sure you guys get this right, because I see a bunch of people. In papers, people mess this up. So it's easy to do. Lots of people do it. I don't want you guys to do it. So if you ever see in SBRT, SRS, a lot of times for parallel tissue like this, especially the lung, liver, and kidneys, you have these critical volume dose constraints, and you do not handle it like a V20 or a D20 or something like that. It's different. This is how you calculate the value for these constraints. So again, if you have any questions about that, let me know. Otherwise, that's it. Hopefully it's an easy week for you. If you have any questions, let me know.